FPS games have taken us to World War II battlefields one too many times if you ask Call of Duty fans, as well as futuristic worlds and everything in between, but there's a side of this genre that's often overlooked: the paranormal. From ghostly encounters in basements to unsettling images of giant babies, developers big and small, FPS games have occasionally dipped their toes into the unknown. Weaving elements of horror and the supernatural into their games, we're going to look at paranormal games started all the way back in 1981 and dive into how games like Doom shaped the way for FPS horror games today. We're diving deep into the eerie, unexplained corners of FPS games where bullets aren't the only thing trying to kill you. Paranormal games surfaced as early as 1981 with the game Haunted House, originally released for the Atari, where players had to navigate a dark haunted mansion filled with ghosts and other elements while trying to escape with an urn. The concept was simple, but the tension you experienced back in this time frame would be comparable to what we experienced with Outlast. The feeling of helplessness and inability to actually attack, and that alone is one of the greatest fears you can have while playing a video game. Now this leads us to the first FPS horror-like game, Doom. This game introduced us in 1993 to more of a demonic presence, not paranormal. This game paved the way for paranormal FPS games despite not even being really that scary. This game in 1993 wasn't being paid for by influencers to play, or huge sales pushes with coupon codes, or being pushed to the front page on Steam by featured tabs. It was a standalone game that sold a lot of copies because it was just that good. While this isn't necessarily what I would consider horror or even remotely scary, it did introduce us to new monsters that we haven't really seen in the FPS genre prior. Things like imps, cacodemons, and even the cyber demon. This game was a hack and slash action shooter, but with supernatural, hellish landscapes we've never seen before, with unsettling sound effects for its time, like the monster's alert sounds, the death sound effects you get when you die, and the horrid screams. And even the background ambient noise of distant growls and hums, all of these things together just heightens the atmosphere. With a unique take on the enemies we'd fight, the sound effects, atmosphere, and the locations we'd be fighting, it really took the FPS genre and put its own spin on it, paving the way for what we would later see in more paranormal-like games that we start noticing as years progress. Fast forward just 4 years and we have a game that really took a deep dive into horror-themed elements and combined it with FPS. Blood. Although the game didn't innovate or do anything remotely different to Doom at the time, as far as what the game HUD looked like or the game played like, a lot of these games back then didn't. They mostly felt the same, but it was the story, the atmosphere, the enemies, and in this instance, the levels you were playing. I'm not going to dive a lot into this game, mostly just references that it utilized in the atmosphere. The game was set in a dark, gritty, and gothic horror environment, a much different approach than Doom. Here we are fighting in haunted mansions, crypts, and graveyards instead of military bases, moons, and the likes of Doom. This created a much more chilling atmosphere and really adding the horror theme onto the game itself. Fighting instead of monsters, you were fighting cultists, zombies, hellhounds, and a lot more. My favorite part about this game is the amount of passion for the genre that it shows, including lines and references from famous horror pop culture, including some jokes from them as well, making it a great time, despite it being a dark and gritty game. There are references from Evil Dead, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and even an entire level dedicated to the Friday the 13th series. Nearly every level features some sort of reference to a horror movie, whether it be the level itself or a voice line even, which is a massive appreciation for me when developers go that extra length to show how much they care about the genre itself. Now we're diving into the first psychological FPS horror game on this list, which is my favorite in the genre, Fear. The thing that this game is so good at doing is creating a sense of dread through the character Alma, who is the main antagonist, a little girl with psychic powers who was subjected to inhumane experiments by a corrupt corporation. The experiments were aimed to harness her abilities, but through this caused her extreme trauma and suffering, causing her main desire to be set on revenge. Knowing this, her story is extremely sad, but also makes her an extremely scary character. She takes the form of a little ghost girl with heavy inspiration from movies like The Ring, which alone is enough to give you a heart attack. The appearances are often brief but extremely impactful, with simple things like her just running across the screen a couple times and disappearing, keeping you on your toes. They are often in places you'd least expect them in, like hallways or even during combat. What makes her one of the most terrifying characters in a video game is the way she is able to defy reality and cause hallucinations, and her connection to the supernatural realm, giving her an aura of omnipresence. and it causes you to constantly feel like you're being watched and no area is safe. The game creates unpredictability because you may be in mid-fight and the game may switch to a horror moment, causing that sense of dread even during intense gunfights. You're still on edge of your seat with that feeling of uneasiness and unknown, despite the game being fast-paced action during times. Resident Evil 7 is one of my personal favorite games, switching the franchise from over-the-shoulder to first-person, which already created a much more terrifying experience. Pair that with a masterfully crafted atmosphere that envelopes players in a sense of dread and vulnerability. The game opens with a haunting cutscene from an email from the protagonist, Ethan Winters' wife, Mia, causing Ethan to go to the Baker household and search for her, only to find out Mia is descending into madness and begins trying to kill him, particularly in one of the most chilling cutscenes I've ever experienced. You hear something in the basement and you walk downstairs in complete darkness, no light at all. As you progress, you begin to hear breathing that gets progressively louder to the point it sounds like it's right in front of you. In the mist, a body appears to be crawling at you. With its face on the stairs, the screen fades to black and what looks like Mia is in front of you with her eyes blackened as she throws you. This creates one of the most disturbing tones I've ever seen in a video game ever. As you progress through this house, you are pursued by a character named Jack. He plays a very similar role to Nemesis in Resident Evil 3. His character is strictly to create dread, danger, and unease, not knowing what wall he'll bust through or what corner he'll be around. This amplifies the tension, forcing you to, despite having an arsenal of weapons, to feel helpless. One of the worst feelings you can have in a horror game. Because of this character design, the house itself becomes a character. The rooms feel darker than before, the corners feel more terrifying to turn down. Every creaking in the floorboards, every door open, it all creates a feeling of terror and fear, leaving you to feel nothing but on edge and unsure of what awaits. We then later run into a character called Evelyn, who's a little girl with similar elements from Alma from Fear. She's a bioweapon who is given the ability to infect people with something called the Mold, where she can control their mind and body. This leads to hallucinations that blur the lines of reality. Evelyn is very devious and taunts Ethan with visions with Mia, both good and bad, leading to a heightened level of psychological horror. The game explores themes of isolation and despair as you become increasingly trapped in reality where trust is shattered, where every interaction you have could lead to a violent end. One thing this game does that Fear did, but I think Resident Evil 7 did it much better, is dive into humanizing the Baker family. After all, they didn't want to become infected, they were just trying to be good people and take care of the little girl when a storm happened, so they took her in. Despite their horrible actions, they really were good people, who just undergone a tragedy, no fault of their own. It allows the players to lean in on sympathy and pain and loss that led to their transformation, causing conflict build up during your fights with the Baker family, leading to a great narrative story to follow. Prey is set in a space station called Talos, which has been overrun by an alien species called Typhon, and you immediately start playing as a character named Morgan. You begin playing in a beautiful environment, an eye-pleasing space station, until something goes terribly wrong. A cup of coffee turns into an alien and attacks your crewmates and you get gassed and being unconscious. A pretty typical day in the office, if you ask me. You awaken on the space station to see a crewmate who has been killed. The thing this game does the best from the very beginning is creating a sense of paranoia that you just can't seem to escape, strictly built upon the enemies in the game, the mimics. These enemies are a huge part of what makes the game so enjoyable, no matter if it's a dark corridor or a brightly lit hallway. These things could be hiding in plain sight on the floor and you'd have no idea. Danger truly does lurk around every corner, and the Mimic exemplifies this constant threat by being able to transform into ordinary objects, making them nearly impossible to identify your first playthrough. The sphere alone causes you to remain vigilant, as you never know what could be a threat, and that fear of being ambushed keeps you on edge, and overall heightens the environment you're playing in. Overall, the gameplay is engaging with a mix of exploration, combat, and problem solving. You'll need to scavenge for resources and craft tools to survive while making strategic decisions how you'll take on each encounter with the Typhon, because each of them have specific things that they are weak against. My personal favorite part about this game that transcends this gameplay from your average exploration horror game to above average is the mimics, and their ability to blend in anywhere, creating a sense of unease and tension around every corner. This not only influences your gameplay strategy, but it causes you to look at the environment in an entirely different way, examining everything, and really causes you to appreciate the world in a different way, all built upon the feeling of suspicion and unknown. Speaking of all this horror, I'm a huge addict when it comes to exploration as well. I will be traveling to the Blair Witch Forest in October for a video idea I have planned for you guys, so be looking for that this month. If you haven't noticed yet, my favorite thing in a horror game is dread. I think it's the best feeling that a developer should go with when creating a horror game rather than relying on cheap jump scare thrills. And the game Cry of Fear doesn't just use jump scares to its advantage, it creates that sense of uneasy feeling no matter what part of the map you are in, paired with a perfectly timed jump scare and positions in the map that you have absolutely no reason to believe that there will be a jump scare in. The environment is extremely dark and gritty from the moment you first step into the eyes of the character Simon. It's filled with extremely unsettling details, from completely dark rooms that you're forced to capture pictures in, to graffiti-filled walls that create that feeling of despair spread throughout the entire city. All that paired with the feeling of isolation and disassociation when you first awaken in a random city confused. The best way I can describe this game is Silent Hill, but first person. Now let's talk about mechanics really quickly. There's a few mechanics in the game that are very simple but heighten tension in the gameplay loop. The first is your phone serves as a flashlight. The second is you have the ability to dual wield your gun and flashlight to see while you're shooting in a dark area. The last thing about your weapon is you can reload at any time, but if you reload before you're out of ammo in that clip, you lose those precious few bullets, which are few and far between. But you can't reload while dual wielding your weapon and flashlight, so this forces you to stop dual wielding to reload, which can be very frightening if you're in the sewers fighting enemies and have to drop your only light source and can no longer see. This mechanic alone forces players to have a sense of inventory management. This forces difficult decisions like deciding if they will reload before entering an area like the sewers and lose those few precious bullets, or reload mid-gunfight in the dark with enemies nearby. This creates tension within itself. Let's dive into inventory management. The game features 6 inventory slots, which there is a lot to pick up, from keys, a knife, multiple guns, your phone, which is your light source, and several other important items. This creates a sense of anxiety and emotional attachment to your weapons, but forces you to make tough decisions if you are no longer finding ammo for a certain weapon type. Do you decide to drop it for that key you really need, or that syringe to heal, or do you hold out in hopes that there's ammo around the next corner? Yes, the game does rely on some jump scares somewhat, but it also digs into the psychological horror of themes like mental illness and trauma, similar to Silent Hill. You witness Simon's unraveling sanity, but it also lets you connect with the protagonist and sympathize with him on a personal level, which creates more of an emotional impact because of the vulnerable state that the character's in. Probably my favorite game in the series, Resident Evil Village. Although this isn't necessarily a horror game the entire way through, we are going to focus heavily on the Beneviento house, which I find to be one of the most unsettling and disturbing segments in gaming history. From the moment you enter, you're hit with an unsettling fear as you hear the floorboards creaking when you first enter. As you make your way through, you start noticing dolls, and I don't know about you, but dolls in real life, yet alone in a video game, freak me out and create a feeling of discomfort. The house is lit, but very dimly lit, to the point it's spookier than if it wasn't lit at all. The house itself is disorienting the way the layout feels and creates a claustrophobic feeling with its narrow hallways that make you feel the tension heavier. Then you reach the main doll, Angie. Your screen fades to black as she starts talking to you and disappears. You come back to reality as you're made aware your gun disappears. That feeling of being helpless is extremely scary. You feel isolated and you feel defenseless, 2 feelings you don't want to ever feel when playing a horror game. This sense of vulnerability intensifies it. If there is anything on this list that creates dread the best, it's this segment right here. Once you play through it a bit, you're forced to climb down a well. It's already ominous because there is a baby cradled at the top, rocking by itself. You climb down the well, and once you get what you need, you climb back up, and you hear a baby crying and the lights are out. This alone is enough to send shivers through your entire body. The best part about this house, it doesn't rely on jump scares even at all. It starts with that sense of just feeling uneasy through the environment, and then the feeling of feeling defenseless, and after that, the infamous baby pops up. You can't do anything but run from it, creating tension through your entire body, knowing it's nearby, and the hallways are so linear and narrow, leaves you feeling the perception that something is right behind you at all times. Lastly, the theme. Donna Beneviento, the theme and story that she follows, is deeply tied to loss, which is a huge symbolism here tied to the baby, in my opinion. A lot of people believe it has to do with Rose. I personally believe because of Donna's parents committing X, can't say it on YouTube, as well as possibly the death of either her child or sister. It's uncertain which Claudia was to her. Either way, I believe that it was her daughter and that the baby segment is a manifestation of her grief. Babies normally symbolize potential for life, vulnerability, and purity. Because of this, this illustrates how even grief can corrupt and distort even the most innocent aspects of life, making this one of the most well put together parts of a video game, in my opinion, ever. Lastly, I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, please like. I love making this kind of content. It's not something that I normally make, but I really enjoy this genre. So if this is something you'd like to see more of, please let me know. If you did, please comment if there was a horror game or horror FPS game that you feel should have made the list. That being said, have a good rest of your day. I'll see you guys in the next one.